Hey, do-it sulfurs, welcome back to another episode by Ratchets and Wrenches, and today, as promised, I'm going to go over my top 10 picks for a reliable car for under $5,000. So obviously these picks are based on my own personal experience, both as a YouTube mechanic know-it-all and a used car dealer. And as everyone knows, used car dealers are highly intelligent and sophisticated people, so make sure you listen up closely. And as I've mentioned in my previous videos, the criteria I used to pick these top 10 cars were: first, whether there was any known or common issues with the engines or the transmissions on these vehicles; second, the rate or the percentage of vehicles affected by the said common problem or defect on the engine or transmission; and the third criteria was the cost of repair. So with that said, here's my number 10, which is a 2000 to 2005 Chevy Impala, or in other words, an 8th generation Chevy Impala. Now these cars come with a 3.8 liter naturally aspirated engine and a 4-speed automatic transmission. But there is an option for a 3.8 liter supercharged engine, but for this video we're talking about the naturally aspirated engine because you're unlikely to get a properly maintained supercharged one for under 5,000 bucks. Now these naturally aspirated engines produce 200 horsepower and 225 pound-feet of torque, and these cars have a curb weight of 3,465 pounds. I should also mention that these engines and transmissions were used in other products made by GM as well, like the Buick Park Avenue, Chevy Monte Carlo, and the Pontiac Bonneville. Now if I'm honest, these cars barely made it to the top 10 list because I personally like the way they drive and how smooth the handling is on these cars. And I say that because these 3.8 liter engines, along with other engines made in this era by GM, have a chronic issue with the lower intake manifold gaskets going bad. Now if you remember, a few years ago I did a video on exactly this repair, where the lower intake manifold gaskets and the lower intake manifold itself were worn and corroded so badly where coolant was leaking into the crankcase. And this problem is very common on these cars, and if you don't catch this on time and coolant starts leaking into your crankcase and you keep running your engine, that coolant can ruin your bottom end, or in other words your bearings, and then you're gonna have to get a new engine. Now many people say that Dexcool, which is the coolant GM uses on these cars, is the problem. It eats away at the plastic lower intake manifold gasket and then causes this issue. Yet others say that Dexcool is fine. You just have to replace the coolant and flush the system every 50,000 miles or so. Now if I was getting one of these cars, what I would personally do is to actually replace the lower intake manifold gasket with the new GM lower intake manifold gasket, which is made out of aluminum. Remove Dexcool from the system, flush the system, and then add a coolant that's phosphate free. There are also two coolant bypass elbows which are made out of plastic, which are on the side of the engine, and these also leak after a while as well. And I highly recommend when you're replacing the lower intake manifold gaskets, you replace these with ones made out of metal as well. But besides that, the rest of the engine and the transmission on these cars are pretty decent and they last quite a while with proper maintenance. Alright, so coming in at number 9 is a 2003 to 2006 Hyundai Elantra. Now these cars come with a 2.0 liter dual overhead cam 4-cylinder engine and a 4-speed automatic transmission. These engines produce 134 horsepower and 133 pound-feet of torque. And these Elantras have a curb weight of 2,635 pounds. Now these Hyundai Elantras, unlike the 3.8 liter GM engine we just talked about, have a timing belt and are an interference engine, which means if the timing belt is not replaced on time and it breaks, your valves hit the pistons, and at the very least you're gonna have to replace the top end of your engine. And again, as some of you that are subscribers to my channel, a few years ago I did a video where one of these engines had overheated and I replaced the head gasket and rebuilt the cylinder head on these engines. Now this issue is not super common on these engines, but it does happen. So if you go to buy one of these engines, you want to make sure that the previous owner has replaced the thermostat, the water pump along with the timing belts, and that the coolant has been replaced as well. Now besides that, these engines and transmissions on these Elantras are actually pretty decent. However, from time to time you're going to run into smaller issues, but none of these issues are going to leave you stranded on the side of the road or in need of a new car. Alright, coming in at number 8, I'm going to grandfather in a German vehicle into this list. What? And that's a 1998 to 2001 Audi A6 Quattro. Now these cars come with a 2.8 liter dual overhead cam V6 engine and a 5-speed Tiptronic all-wheel drive automatic transmission. The engines on these cars produce 200 horsepower and 207 pound-feet of torque, and these vehicles have a curb weight of 3,262 pounds. Now these Audi A6s are part of the C5 platform, which were produced by Audi from 1998 to 2005, I believe. However, you want to get one from 98 to 2001 because in 2002, a CVT transmission was used in these cars, which was not as reliable as the older transmission. Now on the engine side, these engines are really good engines and they last a long time if you maintain them properly. Now the problem is, and as you may have seen in my other videos, maintaining these engines, for example, replacing the timing belt or any of the camshafts, seals, and gaskets that need replacing is a labor-intensive job that includes removing the front end of the engine, which will then allow you to have access to all these components for you to replace. And the problem is that the people that own these cars sometimes delay these repairs due to the cost. And that's when bad things happen, like a broken timing belt, which results in valves hitting the pistons, since these engines are an interference engine. And if that happens, you're gonna build the top end of your engine or get a different engine. Now besides that, there's other minor stuff can go bad, like the secondary air pump can go bad, or the PCV hoses on top of the engine can get old, brittle, and break apart. Now these things usually do not cause a complete engine failure, but if you're at all handy with a wrench, you can do these repairs yourself and save some money. Also, these Quattro transmissions are pretty decent as long as you service them. However, if I remember correctly, I think Audi claims that these are sealed transmissions and that you do not need to service them. But do not listen to Audi, just make sure that you replace the fluid and the filter every 60,000 miles or so, and you should be good to go. So next, coming in at number 7, we have a familiar car from a previous list, which is a Mercury Grand Marquis. Now these cars were produced from 1998 to 2011 with not a whole lot of change done to the engine or the transmission which comes with these cars. Now these cars come with a 4.6 liter single overhead cam V8 engine and a 4-speed automatic transmission. These engines produce 224 horsepower and 272 pound-feet of torque. And these vehicles have a curb weight of 4,118 pounds. Now the engine and transmissions which are used in these cars were also used in other Ford products like the Ford Crown Victorias and the Lincoln Town cars. Now if you go to buy one of these which was made before 2001, you want to make sure that the intake manifold has been replaced. Because in those years, the upper intake manifold on these cars, where the coolant bypass was towards the front of it, was made out of plastic and was a common area for coolant leaks. But after 2001, Ford upgraded these intake manifolds, and where the coolant bypass was then made out of aluminum. Also similar to the Crown Victorias, the catalytic converters on these cars seem to clog up fairly easy. But that's if you have a, let's say, a misfire and you don't treat it and you have that unburnt fuel going through your exhaust system, or you don't do your oil changes on time, damage the oil rings on your pistons, and start burning oil, which again can damage your catalytic converters. All right, next up, coming in at number 6, is a second generation Honda CR-V. And these cars were made from 2002 to 2006. And they come with a 2.4 liter VTEC 4-cylinder engine. And depending on the year or whether it's a 2-wheel drive or a 4-wheel drive, you have options for a 4-speed or 5-speed, automatic, or a manual transmission. These vehicles have a curb weight of 3,347 pounds. Now if you can help it, you want to try to buy the second generation Honda CR-Vs and stay away from the first generation CR-Vs which came with the 2.0 liter 4-cylinder engine. And that's because in the first generation there was some issues with burnt valves on the exhaust side. And if you don't know, if that happens, you're going to have to rebuild your cylinder head or the top end of your engine, which can cost a pretty penny. Now with that said, there is one issue with the second generation Honda CR-Vs, but it's with their AC compressors. These compressors have been known to fail internally, which would result in metal fragments being spread out through your AC system. And to fix that, you would have to replace the AC compressor, your AC condenser, probably other AC components, and then flush the AC system. And all of this obviously is going to cost you a lot of money. But besides that, these cars are pretty well made. The engines are pretty solid. Also, the transmissions seem to be okay and not as bad as other transmissions Honda made, as we talked about in my previous video, like the transmissions in the Honda Odyssey and the Acura TLs. And overall, if you maintain them properly, again, these cars and engines should last you a while as well. All right, coming up next at number 5 is a Nissan Maxima made from 1995 to 2001. These cars come with a 3.0 liter V6 engine and a 4-speed automatic or a 5 or a 6-speed manual transmission. These engines produce 190 horsepower and 205 pound-feet of torque, and these vehicles have a curb weight of 2,870 pounds. Now Maximas from 1995 to 2001 expand over 2 generations. The 4th generation Nissan Maximas were made from 1995 to 1999, and then the 5th generation ones were made from 1999 to 2003. However, the Maximas from 2002 and 2003 are not on my list because in 2002, the 3.5 liter Nissan Maxima engines were used, and those used a timing chain which had issues with both the timing chain and the timing chain tensioner. And then in 2003, a CVT transmission was used in the Nissan Maximas, which I'm not a big fan of. And those transmissions did have a fairly high failure rate. So yeah, if you're buying a Nissan Maxima, make sure it's between 1995 to 2001 and that it comes with the 3.0 liter engine, and that would automatically mean that you do not have the CVT transmission and you should be good. And again, I should mention that this engine and transmission were also used in the Infiniti i30s in the same year range. Yes, the 3.0 liter engines that were being used on these Maximas were some of the most reliable engines being produced between 95 to 2001. And the automatic transmissions were also pretty decent. There wasn't any major or common defects or failures with these transmissions. All right, this video is taking a bit too long, so I'm gonna pick up the speed a little bit. So at number 4, we have a 94 to 99 Acura Integra with a 1.8 liter dual overhead cam engine. There's also an option for a 1.8 liter VTEC engine for these cars. And these cars come with a 5-speed manual or a 4-speed automatic transmission. These engines also produce 176 horsepower and 128 pound-feet of torque for the VTEC engine, and then 138 horsepower and 124 pound-feet of torque for the non-VTEC engine. And these vehicles have a curb weight of 2,595 pounds. Now, the problem with buying one of these cars is actually not the car itself, but finding one that has been properly maintained. And I actually recommend you try to buy an automatic Acura Integra because all the manual ones have been probably heavily modified, neglected, or even beat up on. Yeah, these cars were a popular car to modify, especially the ones that come with VTEC. As far as common problems or issues, you might have a higher failure rate than normal when it comes to your engine and transmission mounts. You might also have oil leaks from cam seals or crankshaft seals, but those are really maintenance items and should be replaced when you replace the timing belt. All right, so coming in at number 3, it's something fun for a change, which is a 1996 to 2005 Mazda Miata. Now, these cars come with a 1.8 liter dual overhead cam 4-cylinder engine and a 5 or 6-speed manual or a 4-speed automatic transmission depending on the year. These engines produce 140 horsepower and 119 pound-feet of torque. And these cars, if they're 98 or newer, have a curb weight of 2,348 pounds, or if they're 96 or older, have a curb weight of 2,070 pounds. Damn, that's light. These little 4-cylinder rear-wheel drive cars are pretty fun to drive around. And with plenty of room in the engine bay to work on the engine and maintain it, they're usually well maintained, which results in reliability. Now, they do come with a timing belt that needs to be replaced on time, but these engines are non-interference, which means if the belt breaks, the valves are not going to hit the pistons and they're not going to destroy your engine. As far as common issues or problems, if you have an older Mazda Miata with a manual transmission, the master and slave cylinders seem to develop leaks and need to be replaced. Also, if you leave the car sitting for a while or like to drive low on gas, a lot of times you might have a fuel pump that fails prematurely. All right, so for number 2, back to boring but reliable, which is a 2003 to 2007 Toyota Corolla with a 1.8 liter dual overhead cam 4-cylinder engine with variable valve timing. And these cars come with a 4-speed automatic transmission or a 5-speed manual transmission. The engine on these cars produces 130 horsepower and 125 pound-feet of torque, and they have a curb weight of 2,502 pounds. Now, if you go to buy one of these, make sure you buy one with an automatic transmission because the manual transmissions, especially in 2003 and 2004, had failure issues where they would fail internally and completely lock up. Also, if you can help it, you want to make sure you stay away from the 2000 to 2002 Corollas because in those years, the Corollas had excessive oil consumption issues, but in 2003, Toyota fixed that. As far as common issues or problems, I really can't think of anything else off the top of my head. You know, these Toyotas are pretty reliable and they actually come with a timing chain which you do not have to replace like a timing belt. Also, it goes without saying, these engines were also produced in the Toyota Matrix, Pontiac Vibes, and the Prisms as well. And now the moment you've been all waiting for. The number 1 reliable car that you can get for under 5,000 bucks is a 1998 to 2000 Lexus LS400. That's right, and these cars come with the infamous 1UZFE 4.0 liter V8 engine and a 5-speed automatic transmission. These engines produce 290 horsepower and 300 pound-feet of torque, and these vehicles have a curb weight of 3,657 pounds. As far as reliability, these engines are pretty much bulletproof. You just have to keep up with the regular maintenance intervals and you should be good to go. Now, as far as common problems or issues with these cars, well, depending on where you live, you might have to replace the struts, motor mounts, or transmission mounts at a slightly higher rate when compared to other cars. Also, these engines come with timing belts and are interference engines, so you want to make sure you replace that timing belt at the proper interval. But besides that, these cars are very reliable and these engines will outlast any other engine just with proper maintenance. These cars are very fun to drive. They also have very smooth handling. And these Lexus LS400s keep their value a lot better compared to other cars. It's not uncommon to see these cars with, close to 200,000 miles, but still selling for $3 or $4 grand. And that concludes this week's top 10 list. But you want to make sure you subscribe to this channel and stay tuned for next week's video, because in that video, I'm going to give you my list on fun sports car you can get for under 5,000 bucks. And also until then, you can check out these other related videos, of which I put links to on this side of the screen. There will also be links down below in the description box as well. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys soon.